Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the last episode of Season 1 of the It Depends Lessons in Technology Leadership podcast. I, as always, am your host. My name's Kevin Goldsmith. This episode is a very special one. This is what I might call a bit of a meta episode. In this episode, we're going to talk about why I wrote a book. The reason I started this podcast was to share chapters from the audiobook of my book, It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership 2012 to 2022. And I get asked all the time, why did you write a book? How did you write a book? How should I write a book? Why would I write a book? All these kind of questions. Even if you are not particularly interested in writing a book yourself or launching a podcast or a newsletter, this episode may be still of interest to you. I'll get into all the weird little details of this kind of thing. If you're not familiar with the business of this or just understanding how you approach building a new business, because that is essentially what I've done, is I've created a new publishing company. I've launched a new business for myself as a book writer and how I approach that. So even if you're thinking about, oh, maybe I should start my own consulting company, or maybe I should do my own startup someday, this may be a different approach to some of these ideas than you might get other places. So I've got a bit of an agenda today. I'm going to give you a heads up so that you can either skip ahead or just say, you know what, actually, I'm going to skip this one. I can understand that too. So first, I'm going to talk about why did I want to write a book? Why should you write a book if you would consider it? I'll get into the details a little bit, including talking about specific tools I used to write it. For those of you who don't know, while there is a company that published the book, Unit Circle Press, that company is me. I'll talk a little bit about why I self-published the book as opposed to going with a more established brand, a publisher, or something like that. I'll talk a little bit about the details of self-publishing, the actual, this is how you do it if you want to do it. But also into that, I talk about a little bit of how you start a new business and what are the things you need to consider when building a business. And I'll talk a bit about the audiobook. And if there's time, I will talk a little bit about the podcast and the newsletter and how I do those things as well. To start off with, why did I want to write the book? You've heard, if you've been listening to the podcast, especially you've been listening to chapters, each chapter came from a different period of time. And the book was collection of writing 2012 to 2022. So I've been blogging for a long time. I'm not a super productive blogger. There are tech leadership bloggers whose names you probably know who publish daily or at least weekly. Originally, I started blogging partially because there wasn't a lot of content. I started in the mid-2000s blogging about my leadership journey as I was moving from being a lead to being an engineering manager to moving up to director and then so on and so forth. And while I'm not a massively productive blogger, over that amount of time, there was quite a lot of posts I did. And I'd always thought about writing a book someday. I've been doing this job a long time. There's a lot of stuff I've learned. When I read other people's books, well, I'm not a massive writer. I'm a pretty massive reader. And so I'm reading every book that comes out specifically on my career and most of your careers on tech leadership and tech management. I'm always trying to hear different people's perspectives and lessons they've learned because it's my career. I want to get better at my job, even though I've been doing it for a long time. And what I would find consistently would be, especially as I got more experienced, I'd hear things and be like, that's not really the way that works. Or, well, I can see why that worked for you in your specific situation, but based on my experience, that actually wouldn't work generally. And I don't like that you recommended this as a general solution. You're basing too much of your opinion on a very little experience. It's a kind of a common thing in business books generally, but it really kind of irked me. And if there's one thought that permeates almost all my writing, It is, if I'm talking about something I did, I'm like, hey, this worked for me. Don't do what I did. Take the pieces that make sense to you and use it in your way. So I never try and tell you, this is how you do a one-on-one. This is how you do this. This is how this works. And I understand why people actually like that very direct way of talking. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. I don't, because I've just seen way too many times where the thing that worked for you before isn't working for you again, but you don't know any other way of doing it. And so I'm always trying to more educate around the idea rather than be very prescriptive. There are times I have been very prescriptive, but usually when I'm doing that, it's because I'm in an environment where I understand people are really looking for that. So sometimes, like in my conference talks, I got a little bit more like, here's some tools, but even then I'll tell you, try this, iterate on it, make it your own. Don't just do what I did. Anyway, so that was one of the reasons why I wrote a book, because I read a lot of other people's books and said, yeah, mostly, but not always. Almost any book I'd recommend. And I was mentoring developers, I was mentoring leads, I was mentoring managers as I grew in responsibility. And I would recommend books constantly because I read a lot of books. But almost every time I'd say, this is a pretty good book. I agree with a lot of it, but just be careful about when they say this. Or I might say, this book is written in this is how this works. The person who wrote it has only been doing their job, the job they're talking about, for like a year. So they really actually don't know how it works. There's a lot of books from folks who have been in a role for a year or two and then to write a book about that role. And I'm like, no, sorry. There's another reason why I waited so long to write a book, which is I don't like writing about anything until I've had the time to actually understand it and understand it over time, because that's where the real wisdom comes from. So I'm always really skeptical of books about this is how executive leadership works from somebody who's only been an executive in one company or somebody who's only been an executive leader for a year or two. And unfortunately, there's a lot of those books. So that's another reason why I wrote my book. It was just because I felt like while there was a lot of good stuff out there now, my specific perspective, I just didn't see in anybody else. And there's, by the way, in tech leadership literature, The Hard Thing About Hard Things and Joel Spolsky's stuff, these are collections of blog posts, right? Some of the books I've really appreciated have been this kind of book. So that was another reason why I felt comfortable with it. I thought also this is a good calling card. If I decide I want to work with a publisher on a second book, I can show them this first book as a sample of my work. So why should you or should you not write a book? There's a lot of reasons why you may or may not want to write a book. First of all, if you feel like you have a unique perspective, if there's a way you approach things that you don't hear anybody else talking about and you think people would appreciate that, that's great. That's a great reason to write a book, to add a unique voice. If you're just going to say what other people are saying, probably not worth it. Maybe you say it in a better way, sure. So that's one reason, I think, to add to the collective knowledge. Another great reason to write a book is, frankly, self-promotion. We are all trying to stand out in our field because we want people to think of us when they're hiring. And having made a name for yourself, not the worst thing in the world to do. To other execs I mentor, I often will suggest, maybe you want to start a blog, maybe you want to start a newsletter, maybe you want to start these things, not to make yourself an influencer, but to start to build a public body of knowledge that people may be familiar with, so that if somebody is thinking about hiring a new CTO or a new VP, I think it's not as critical at lower levels, but helps a lot at the senior exec level to have what you think out in the world, especially if it's something a recruiter reads or it's something a headhunter reads or something a CEO has somebody refers them to. It has helped. It has helped me get jobs. Absolutely. Not necessarily the book, because I've had the same job the whole time since the book came out, but certainly public speaking, blogging has absolutely helped me get a job. And I know because people have told me in an interview, oh, I read your blog, I really like this article, or I saw you speak at this conference and I really enjoyed it. Okay, well, they know a bit about me. They know a little bit more about me. Let me talk a little bit about the mechanics of actually writing it. First of all, my blog, which is blog.kevingoldsmith.com, it's all on WordPress. Every time I publish on other sites, and I publish on lots of other sites, sometimes I've been paid to write for other sites or just guested on other blogs. The rule I've always had is at a certain point in the future, that content will be duplicated on my blog, and I will link back to the original thing. I'll make sure the attribution is correct, but I always make sure that anything I write ends up back on my blog at some point. You may read me on Medium. I'm also on Medium or on LinkedIn, but everything generally starts with my blog or it will end up on my blog. So that is the record of basically everything I've ever written. I went through there, pulled out a bunch of relevant posts, extracted them from the database, and saved them, converted them to Markdown, used some Python code and Pandoc, put them into Word. So now I had a bunch of stuff in Word. I played around with a bunch of ways of trying to do this. I will say I wasted a lot of time trying to figure out the tools because obviously as a developer, I'm super excited about all the different ways of doing this with tools. But eventually I settled into Microsoft Word. First, separate documents. I combined them all into a single document, figured out the order before that, and used Pandoc for that. And then I mostly edited and added new content in Word. A lot of my individual posts have been edited by editors, some for the sites that I was publishing on, some I hired myself. The last couple of years, I had found it really better to find my own editor, and I did. I worked with a few different over the years. They're all credited in the back of the book. So they would help me edit my own posts. About half the book, maybe 2/3 of the book, had already had a human editor review. When I went back through it, I went through it with Grammarly. I love Grammarly. I have degrees in math and computer science. I do not have a degree in English. My grammar is not great. Grammarly helps me with that. And so, I relied on that a lot. When I talk in the book about I didn't really change any content, I cleaned up a lot of stuff. That's what I meant, is pretty much would clean up how I would say things to make it read better. But that was basically the last thing I did on the book as far as the content. I wanted to have an index. There's a lot of stuff I reference, specific products, specific people. I thought it would be helpful to have an index in the print edition of the book. Having never done an index before, I learned there were services you could hire that would go through your book and generate indexes for you. I decided to try out ChatGPT. And this was pretty early in ChatGPT's lifetime, but I built some Python code. It's on my GitHub. You can find it, where I used OpenAPI to ingest chapter by chapter, especially at the time. I couldn't ingest the whole book. So I chapter by chapter, and each chapter would generate in a specified JSON format a list of possible index words, where it was in the text, the relevance or whatever. And I wrote some code to combine all that JSON and essentially build an index. And then I went through, this was a huge mistake and I wasted a lot of time with it. For those of you who are word geeks, Word has a lot of stuff in it to help you build your own index, which was great. So I used that and this JSON file to build an index for the book, which I was really proud of up until the next point, which is when I actually tried to get the book ready for publication and ended up having to throw that all away. Next, I want to talk about why did I self-publish? I could have contacted a bunch of different publishing companies. There are a lot in the space, or some I've even worked with because I've blurbed other people's books or helped or reviewed other people's books. So I know a bunch of people at different publishing companies. And I thought about that. My experience with working with other people and working with publishing companies was they're going to set a lot of expectations, which is natural. They're investing, essentially. They're going to set a lot of expectations around dates, around content. They're going to want a lot of input into it. And the benefit is they're also going to take care of a lot of stuff for me, including things like promotion and distribution and things like that. And what I decided was, with this book in particular, I figured that I wanted to understand a little bit more about what it takes to write a book, what it takes to distribute a book. I wanted to learn the business a little bit. And that comes back from me as a Gen Xer, grew up in a DIY kind of culture, do it yourself culture, been a musician for 40 years. And I've had my music distributed by other record labels, but my primary thing has always been a record label I started myself that put out my music, it put out my friends' music, it put out other people's music. It was something that I was really serious about for a long time. And part of that is I had to learn how the music business worked and how promotion worked and how advertising worked and all those things, and how royalties and publishing and copyright worked. And so I'd done a lot of that in a different, I'd say, adjacent business. And so, one, I also felt very comfortable that I could do that again. Not that I'm a world-class expert on publishing books, but I knew that the tools to self-publish are so much easier now. So I figured for this book, which might be successful, might not be successful, my first book, I figured, you know what, maybe I'll do this one myself. And based on that experience, maybe I do another one myself, maybe I don't do any more books, or maybe I work with a publisher next time. I will also say that I'm lucky that I have a pretty broad set of skills doing my own graphic design for ads and things like that. So I was also very comfortable with a lot of the tools. So the book is designed by me, and it worked out great. I'm very happy with the way it came out. A professional designer might have a lot of quibbles with the way I did stuff. Fair enough, but I'm pretty happy with it. I also recorded the audiobook myself. I recorded it on the same equipment I'm using right now because I just so happens I have essentially a professional recording studio in my home office, which I use mostly for music, but turns out I have a good mic, I have a good interface, I have good software. Basically, I could do that as well, and I'm very comfortable editing audio. So all that stuff I was able to do myself. And that's another reason why I self-published, because I knew there was a lot of stuff I was going to have to learn, but I was also pretty confident that I'd learned it in a different business before. And I figured if I ever was in a negotiation with a real publisher, then I would come from a place of knowledge as opposed to, I don't understand any of this, and I'm just going to have to believe whatever you tell me. So that also was an important part of it. On the details of self-publishing, let's talk about the print book for a minute. I knew I wanted to have ebook, softcover, and hardcover. So I very specifically looked for companies that would help me do that. Also, having run a record label with physical goods for a long time, I didn't want to have 1,000 books in my garage or a storage locker for the rest of time, because the expense of producing them would mean that I would be forever just trying to pay that back. So I was also very much interested in a drop ship, one at a time. And it's a little bit less convenient for you. If you bought my book, you may have had to wait a little bit longer than you're used to. Sorry about that, but the good news is you did get it. I looked at a bunch of different options there, and I found the ones that I thought produced the best quality work and most consistent. I knew I had to work with Amazon. If you're working with Amazon, you pretty much need to do Amazon's self-publishing platform, which is called KDP. So yes, I knew I was going to do Amazon. A lot of authors do KDP and then they're done. They just only distribute through Amazon. I felt very strongly that I wanted to be available outside of Amazon as well, partially because I like going to bookstores. I like going to local bookstores. I have a local bookstore that I have bought hundreds of books from, and I wanted to support them. So I wanted to make sure that my book could be available there. I also wanted to give another option for people who didn't want to be on Amazon. I ended up using two companies, Amazon KDP and Ingram Spark. That hurt me a little bit because Amazon really wants to be your exclusive, and you get a lot of benefits by going exclusively with Amazon. So there's certain like sales I can't do, certain promotional activities I can't participate in because I am not going only with Amazon, but I thought that was a reasonable trade-off to be available in other places. And if you go to itdependsbook.net, you'll see the Amazon links, and you'll see links for Barnes & Noble and bookshop.org and lots of other places. Everything that's not Amazon is coming through Ingram Spark. So I'm very happy with that. You can, with both of these distributors, you can supply them basically a pre-laid out document that they just consume and use, or you can use their online tools to lay out the book. I originally had thought the book was in a Word document. That's all I need. No, that's not really the case. I end up having to ingest the Word document into these online tools and redo it 3 times over. One for Ingram Spark, one for Amazon softcover, and one for Amazon hardback, which took a tremendous amount of time. It was a lot of work to make sure everything looked right, to make sure everything laid out right, to fix all the indexes, because the indexes refer to specific page numbers. And even though the sizes of the book, if you look at the Ingram Spark book versus the Amazon book, they're about the same size, they end up with different page counts, stuff laid off on different pages. So I then also had to go back and update all the indexes to point to the correct pages. So there was a lot of work to do there. The formatting didn't come through. You need to use their formatting. So that was where I spent a long time kind of re-editing the book before I got to that point. I spent a long time doing that, basically doing it 3 times over for the different formats of the print book. That was a pain. If you're planning on doing this process, what I might do next time was work with somebody who does this for a living and pay them the money to do it, and then provide basically the print ready document to the various publishers, because I'm assuming they have tools to do that a lot more than I do. Or what I'd probably do is really target one format, and then from that format, use that as the basis for the other ones, instead of essentially assuming the Word document I had was going to be like the print ready one, which it really wasn't. So that was the biggest pain in getting the book ready for print. On the audiobook side, I said I have experience doing audio engineering stuff, which I do, and lots of great tools, which I do. While I'm very used to editing audio, I will say I am a musician. I am not a singer. I don't do a lot of editing of speech. To give you an idea, the last time I did a lot of editing of speech, I was doing it with literally with reel-to-reel tape, a razor blade, and tape. So it's been a long time. Obviously, the tools are way easier, and I'm used to using them to edit music. There was a lot I learned about that. And I'm obviously much more comfortable speaking into a microphone now, especially understanding I'm going to have to edit it. But I learned a lot in that process too. Things like I didn't have a pop filter because I used this microphone, which is a Rode NT1A, an old school Rode. I bought it in the 90s. They still make these. These are great mics. But I use it for cello. I use it for bass cabs. I don't really use it for speech. It's a great mic for speech. But then, I need a pop filter, things like that. So learning to do that, learning to read on a mic or speak on a mic so that you don't hear me go and a lot. When I later had to edit every one of those out, that was tough. So recording the audiobook, just had the book in front of me, read it out over. You'll also hear, if you listen to the audiobook, is that at various points I sound a little bit more hoarse. I read it out over essentially that Christmas to New Year's week, spent every day reading it. And by the end of the day, my voice would sound hoarse somewhere in there. I had a bit of a cold. You can hear all that. And I just didn't have the time to wait it out because I had that week off and then I was going to be getting back to work. So I just had to go with it. So if you hear that, yeah, that's why. For audiobook distribution, you can't use the same distributors. I start out with Findaway Voices, which is actually owned by Spotify. It's a company Spotify bought, which is cool, actually. They had a really great business model, and they distributed not only to Spotify, but to Audible and everybody else. Spotify is now getting out of the audiobook distribution to anybody but Spotify. They're transitioning it to in audio. That's going to happen next month in July. I have no experience around that, so I can't recommend it. On the promotion side, once I had the book ready to go, I'd ordered test copies. I was happy with them. I made a few changes, did another set of test copies. The audiobook was ready to go. That's when I decided when to launch the book. I'd wanted to do it in January of 2024. I ended up doing it in March because I wanted a little bit of time to promote it. If you are doing something like this, it's always good to have time to lead up to it. So I started this podcast in January. I started the newsletter in January. And again, before the book went live, because I wanted to start to build an audience, to build some expectation, start to get the word out. I was guesting on other podcasts. I get interviewed on other podcasts a lot. Made sure I was announcing this and promoting it and letting people know, putting it in my social media, making people aware of it that way. I speak at conferences, starting to talk about it at conferences and just make people aware of it. Again, try and build some expectation. I also started doing Google ads. I built the website, the itdependsbook.net website. I started exploring Google ads. I work in a lot of B2C companies. I'm very familiar with SEO and SEM. And it's one thing to be very familiar and even to be managing teams that work on this stuff. So you're very understanding of the mechanics. It's another whole thing to actually build a Google ad campaign yourself, which I did. So I learned a lot about that. There's a lot of ways to get that wrong. But that was another important part of it, was to start to actually promote the book. Now, an interesting thing and a good thing about that DIY aesthetic, especially in today's world where you can not have to manufacture a whole bunch of things, store them, distribute them. When I was running a record label, I'd have to make 1,000 or 2,000 CDs for an artist. I'd have to send out maybe 150 to radio, 150 to press to get some radio play, get some reviews going. So now I'm already out 30% maybe of the copies. I've had to pay for shipping. I've had to pay for production. You started every record several thousand, maybe $10,000 in the hole. And now the record comes out and now you're basically having to pay yourself back. And before the artist can get any money, you got to get your money back because you've invested a lot of money into it. So what I didn't want to do, what I was really happy not to do, and what I think made this work for me and why I liked it, why I may do it again, I'll talk about that in a minute, was the fact that I spent a bit of money, but very little, right? So I bought a subscription for the podcast publishing platform. I already had subscriptions to some of the tools I use, so that was fine. Once I started buying ads, obviously now I'm starting to spend money, but I could decide how much I wanted to spend. If I'd really wanted to promote it, I would have spent a lot of money, but I could choose how much I wanted to spend and I could wait and see. So I started pretty slow and I was learning a lot about how to do an effective Google ad campaign, literally just going through their tool. Because while you understand stuff like buying keywords and all that kind of stuff in the abstract, actually trying to do it through a tool like Google Ads is another whole thing. How has this whole thing gone? It's gone pretty well. I haven't sold 1 billion books. I haven't made a ton of money, but I've sold a lot of books, a lot more than I expected. And that to me was a success. I was very prepared to sell 5 books and be done. And I've sold way more than that. I actually don't even know off the top of my head. I sell on average a few every week. And while when I talk to other authors in this space who you definitely know, if you're reading me, you've already read them, they sell way more books than I do. But they also write a lot more. They speak a lot more. They invest a lot more into building their brand than I do. And so I'm very happy with how I've done. I continue to sell books. People are continuing to finding it through this podcast, finding it through my newsletter, finding it through, honestly, at this point, people recommending it. And they're telling me. I bought copies for all the EMs that work for me, which if you do that, very much appreciate it. If you want to do that and buy them direct from me, I'll give you a discount or get you a discount. But the nice thing again about this DIY thing was the book was profitable immediately, basically. Like within the first month, I was above water. And at that point, I could then decide how much more do I want to invest to try and grow the book, or am I happy with my level here and maybe I'll make a little bit of money. And so I've been able to either promote more, promote less, just month by month, just deciding on things. That was the nice part, is I didn't feel like I'd spent a ton of money and I was never going to earn it back. I'm never really earning a lot of money, but that's a choice I've made as opposed to a choice somebody else has made. I also felt very happy that if I'd gone with a publisher and they weren't making money, how guilty I would feel. So that also felt good because they would have to manufacture lots of books and stuff like that and spend a lot more money on promotion because they need to make a lot of money because that's how their business works. I felt pretty good about the fact that I was a profitable author without having to worry about the business. I think the other part of it too is my royalty payments are pretty low, right? You buy the ebook for $10 or something on Amazon. Of that, I get $2, like $2.50 or something, maybe $3. But you spend $10 or you spend $20 on the hardcover, of which I get less than $3. And that's okay. That is essentially Amazon taking a cut, but they have to print the book, they have to ship the book, all that stuff, right? So they take their cut. I'm cool with that. I signed the agreement. I'm good with it. But if I'd gone with a well-known publisher, yeah, I'd be getting cents per book. So I probably made way more money publishing the book myself than I would have made going through even a really well-known publisher. So that also feels honestly pretty good. When you buy my book on Audible, you buy my book, right? I get a pretty good royalty on Audible, and that gets me another few bucks a month. Spotify, you stream it, I get, I think, 40 cents, something like that. So if in any way you were hoping to write a book and make $1 million, there's better ways to do that, way easier ways to do that. Would I do it again? Absolutely. I would absolutely do it again. The whole process of writing the book, yeah, there's a lot of work. And the book is 2012 to 2022. The book came out in 2024. Between 2022 and 2024, I was editing, I was preparing. There was a lot of work that went into it. Not solid, not the whole time, but there was a lot of work that I put into it to get it ready, to record it, obviously doing this podcast, doing the newsletter, to promote it. There's been a lot of energy and effort put into it. But the process itself has been nice. I love having a physical thing that kind of represents who I am as a technology leader. I have all the little tchotchkes from all the companies I've worked at and some of the t-shirts, but the book feels great. This is who I am. It's good to have like a physical manifestation, something that may end up in a landfill, may end up in a library. And both of those are okay. Would I self-publish again? Probably, definitely. Will Larson, who's written some great books, he has both self-published and gone through a well-known publisher, and he wrote a good blog post about his experience doing both. He and I were both keynoting at a conference. I talked to him a little bit about his experiences with that. He had very similar experience. He was lucky in that his self-published books, his first book was self-published, but it was self-published through like his company. And he worked, I think, for Stripe at the time. So that helped a lot, even though it was self-published. So that got him a lot of notice. He did very well with his self-published books. And then having a well-known publisher publish one of his books, his royalties are way lower. Honestly, I think that book is probably less well-known even than his self-published book. So yeah, would I definitely self-publish the next book if and when I write the next book? If a major publisher came to me and said, hey, we'd like to publish your book, I might try it, but I'm not going to go and try and sell my book to publishers. I've had publishers approach me in the past when I wasn't really ready to write a book. If somebody approached me now, maybe I might look into it, but I might self-publish again. I definitely wouldn't have a problem doing it. What would I do differently next time? I didn't work as hard as I could have to get reviews. I mentioned when I ran a record label, I worked really hard to get reviews. I built over years a list of every music publication I could find in the world. And that meant going to, at the time, record stores and buying any magazine I'd never seen before. When I would travel anywhere, I would do the same. I would stop by every record store and newsstand and buy any music publication I hadn't seen before. And over time, I developed a really big mailing list. So I ran a record label for years and years. I had a great mailing list, which meant that I could be pretty sure of getting on order of 20 or 30, maybe 40 reviews for any record I sent out, which was really helpful because it'd be all over the world. I didn't really try, so I didn't submit my book to lots of various publications. It didn't even occur to me. Next time I probably would. I'd probably work to build that again, maybe even at least consider hiring somebody to help me with it. I didn't do a book tour per se, so I didn't go and travel and speak at bookstores or anything like that. I probably should have or could have. But again, it would have been me arranging it. I would have had to invest in doing that or me hiring somebody, which I wasn't sure if the cost benefit of analysis on that would make sense. So I didn't do that. I might consider doing that again, or at least trying to set up when I'm traveling someplace, trying to find a local bookstore and arrange a reading or event there. Next time I write a book, I'm not going to be collecting blog posts. So I'm going to be writing something from scratch. I will absolutely hire an editor. I am not as good a writer as I'd love to be. I might also hire somebody else to do the actual book layout just because it was so time consuming for me. There are plenty of people that do that for authors. If I was self-publishing, I would at least consider that strongly. I might actually have somebody help me with a lot of the promotion and the ad campaign. Like I said, I probably wasted a lot of money. Just me not understanding the intricacies of Google ad tool. People who do this for a living do it for a living and make good money because it is a pain in the ass. I'd find out my book was getting promoted on just massive amounts of click farms. I was just wasting money. So that happened a couple times. I had to track that down pretty quickly and fix it. And it's the kind of thing where if this is your job, you know this stuff in and out, and you know how to catch it and you know how to avoid it from happening in the first place. The other thing I probably do differently next time is do a lot more social media promotion. If you follow me on social media, you'd see maybe one post a week from me about a new chapter in the podcast or a new chapter on the Substack. And that'd be about it. I didn't do any YouTube videos beyond just appearing on other people's podcasts or things like that. And I would have done more. I'm not seeking to be a influencer type person, and I don't like self-promotion generally. If it feels too forced, I feel weird about doing that kind of stuff. I shouldn't, but I do. And so I struggle with that. But to be fair, that might have helped more. And you may see this summer, I have recorded video stuff. I just never put it out. You may see some of that stuff showing up on YouTube just as I play with this and think about how I want to do things differently moving forward. But it certainly didn't help that I didn't do this for the book and leading up to the book and then after the book was published. So I do that differently as well. I wanted to add a little bit about how I do the podcast. Well, I would say how I do the newsletter, but the newsletter, to be fair, is so straightforward that there's not a lot I can add or say that's interesting about it. The details on the podcasts, if you're interested, if you're thinking about doing your own. So again, I'm recording this on an NT1A, which is a pretty old microphone now, but it's a very good one. Rode continues to update this specific mic. So there's newer versions. There's ones with USB. This one is plugged into a Mark of the Unicorn interface and then connected to my computer. I record in Ableton Live, which is honestly not the best way to do a podcast, but they had a really nice podcast template that I really liked. What I do is I record into Ableton. I actually edit in a different program, edit the text content or the spoken content in a different program called Descript, which turns the audio into a text representation. And I'm really just editing text a lot, which to me actually is a really nice workflow. I use Descript really to do the bulk of the editing. I bring it back into Live. I'll do additional editing. So it takes me to produce a newsletter. It will take me a few hours, about the same for a podcast. The podcast is obviously spent a lot more is just editing the audio. I record for a while. I generally don't write a script in advance. I maybe have some notes, but I'm either going off the book chapter and I'll have read that again to prepare for it, or I will be going off your questions and I'm just answering them, because I also think that makes this sound a little bit more informal, which I like. I like podcasts that don't feel too formal. Then I may get lost in eddies or go down paths that aren't really productive. So I'll edit lots of stuff out. So I end up recording about 50% more than I end up including in the podcast. And that Descript helps with that. So I really like that program. I don't get paid by them. There's not a paid endorsement or anything. I just use it and I found it valuable. And then Ableton Live. These are the main tools I use for the podcast. And Podbean. I use Podbean to distribute. And that's all the details on why I wrote the book, why you may want to write the book, how you might write a book, how you might do a podcast. I hope that was helpful. Before I go, I want to remind you that I have some speaking engagements coming up July 30th in Seattle as part of Seattle Startup Week. I'm giving a talk at a startup event hosted by Cavness HR, which is a company that I've helped out the founder over the years, a friend of mine. I really appreciate him. He's putting together a startup competition and event on July 30th. I'll include a link to that in the show notes. In October, I'm speaking at Lead Dev New York, and I'm talking about product and tech friction and how to overcome it. So that's two different upcoming talks on either coast. I'm taking, if you've heard in the prior episodes, I'm taking July and August off. I haven't taken any breaks since I started this podcast in January of 2024. I'm going to take July and August off this year. In this slot, I will be sharing a few greatest hits episodes of the podcast. So rather than just completely disappear from your feeds, I will be resharing older episodes. I'll probably do the same in the newsletter. I will see you in September. And I will see you next week in the newsletter for the final newsletter, which will be a synopsis of this podcast. I hope you have a great week, and I hope you have a great summer. See you in September. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.